guys. So good to have you back for another week of Evolve. I am excited about this show today, but I want to tell you first that I am your host, Monette Brann-Natta. And the reason that I'm excited about this show today is because it is a special show. It's a special show because it's about rightfully honoring the people who have given their very lives for our freedoms. It is special because the man who dedicates great swaths of his life to this sadly overlooked cause has carved out the time to be here today to educate us all. And with a bronze star with 2 oak leaf clusters and V device, and an Army Commendation Medal, and an Air Medal, a Purple Heart, Combat Infantryman Badge, a Vietnam Gallantry Cross with a Bronze Star, an Army Reserve Achievement Medal, Army Reserve Commendation Medal, National Defense Services Medal, Vietnam Service Medal, Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal with 7 oak leaf clusters. I would say that he has earned the right to teach us all about patriotism and his project, the In America Project. As Fred and I were chatting in preparation for this interview today, he said something to me that stopped me in my tracks. He said, "You know what the first thing is that an injured soldier says when they're hurt? It's mom. They don't exclaim in pain or ask compadres for reassurance. They just cry out for their mother, as we all would." I can't even imagine how harrowing this life and death moment is, but it struck me that what we all want, is comfort, care, and compassion in this moment. Someone who really cares. In many ways, my guest today has taken up the cross in a Herculean effort to stand in the gap for thousands of soldiers who've bravely fought for our country and were forgotten. He provides them with care and compassion that they called out for in those last moments and that they so richly deserve for their valiant service. And he does this by taking his time and traveling the country and scouring it for lost souls who have been forgotten and laid to rest unceremoniously, sometimes in tin cans on shelves. He and his team of volunteers find the time, and they find them, and they lay them to rest with dignity. Fred Salanti is a real-life American hero. His noble work with the In America Project, a project he founded, has resulted in a Pulitzer Prize-winning article and an actual law passed through Congress and signed by President Obama. I am so honored to get to introduce you today to this patriot and for you all to really get to peek into the heart of a giant. So, Mr. Fred Salanti, it is so good to have you here today.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and boy, I think the interview's done. You've said more than I can even try to say.
I mean, you did all of that. I didn't do that. I was so kind of gobsmacked when I saw the list of medals. I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize. It's amazing the work that you've done. And it didn't stop there. You didn't stop with your work in the military. And that's really what you're here today to talk about, is the fact that you've really gone forward past that. But before we get into your work, I just want to give our listeners a little background and set the table. Can you tell me what made you want to serve our country?
Well, I think the first thing that if you realize that in my background, I had went during my high school years to a Jesuit seminary to be a Catholic priest. And during that period, my father was killed in a auto accident, and so I became very angry and depressed that how could a good God take away my dad when I was giving my life to serve him.
Right.
So I ended up leaving the seminary, and at the same time, my brother, who was 4 years older than me, was in the Army and in Korea and in France. And he was like the soldier of the month every year. He was the epitome of the top soldiers. Spit polish, starched uniforms, the whole works.
Right.
He was selected to go to officer candidate school, but he had to put in for a hardship discharge. when my dad died to come home and help my mom take care of 3 kids. And so I've always had a military little bit of hierarchy with him. And of course, I was a very adventuresome soul that always loved to live in the library, and I read nothing but all of the Greece wartime stories, the Roman Empire. So my mindset was very much
Militarized.
Into that form.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, my brother told me if I ever went into the military, he was going to kick my hiney if I didn't go and become an officer.
Oh, so a little push from Big Brother never hurts.
Yeah. So well, and then I watched him because he was such a perfect person and soldier in that sense that if you have somebody that shows you firsthand what it is to be patriotic and what it is to be that, it instills a spirit in us. And I think more than anything, that's probably, as we talk a little bit further and the effects of Vietnam and the cultural effects, you'll see that the difference lately is that we lost some of that after Vietnam. And so, you go into all of that, and so that's basically what was going on. And then I had 2 roommates, and of course the draft was going hot and heavy, and they decided to go to Canada.
Oh, they skipped out.
They skipped out, and God love them, but I just wasn't in my bones. So they skipped out. I enlisted.
All right. That makes sense, especially with the brother story. That really kind of sets it for me to understand you had such a great example of who to be and a father figure in essence. And so, of course, we want to be like the people we look up to. So it really helps me to understand. So you get into the military, and can you tell us about your experience and impressions as a very young man kind of entering this whole other world? Because I would think I would be terrified. What were your impressions about it?
Well, I, of course, was anxious to get going. And, of course, they, being on the West Coast, they sent me to Fort Lewis, Washington. And I went to basic training in Fort Lewis. And let me tell you, if you know anything about Washington and the current weather that's going on here, there, whatever, one of the most popular songs at the time was 76 Tears. And let me tell you, there was so much rain that when you're in basic training, we shared a lot of those tears with that song. And so there's a lot of adjustment to going into the military and the TAC officers and stuff trying to take away individuality and mold you into a team. And so from everything from learning how to spit polish a latrine with a toothbrush or the floor, you're talking about a different experience from being set in a classroom in high school or out to a weekend party. And so it's a very drastic change in some of that. From there, I went to Fort Ord, and again, one of the questions at basic training was do you want to become an officer? And then you have to take a test and do stuff. And you have to remember, I'm 18 years old.
Okay.
So I'm very impressionable. I'm fresh out of high school. So even in boot camp with the draft, most people were all older than me. I was one of the youngest. And so I took the officer's test and passed it, and sent to Fort Ord to wait to go to OCS while I went to advanced individual training. So the military itself is a different experience. And, of course, when I was at Fort Ord, meningitis was going. So we had all of the deals about airing your mattress, doing all of this stuff so you didn't get sick. And then you had the guys that you watch the famous movies and you see people getting that screwed up, getting kind of pillow attacked and all kinds of stuff. And that stuff is very real. Even though they put it in the movie, they put it in it because it's very real. So your experience in the military is a very dramatic change from being a civilian or a student or I guess my reflection is now to the 30-year-old kids still living at home.
Oh, yeah. It's a rude awakening, I would imagine. A rude awakening.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, here's life. This is what life is really about. And you kind of like moved up in the ranks and became a major by 25, right?
Yeah, and part of that is if you understand the history of the military, when you go to OCS, you automatically become an E5. So here I was in the military for basically 16, 18 weeks, and I was already promoted to an E5. And then I went to OCS on, in fact, February 1st, my birthday, to be 19. And, of course, being one of the youngest guys, even in OCS, was quite an experience. And, of course, they jumped on it because it was my birthday, and I was... it's all the typical thing with somebody in your face and carrying foot lockers at right shoulder arms and getting sprayed with a fire hose while you're taking it. And, you can just go on lots of experiences that we look back now and I say, man, I'd never go do it again. But boy, was I, but I'm glad I'm through it and did it the first time.
I'm glad
it does make you a different person.
Right. And I'm glad you did it too. And that's why I think we deserve such a debt we owe such a debt rather to the people that choose to do this, that voluntarily choose to do this, listeners. People go and get sprayed and they get kind of retrained to protect our rights and our country. It's amazing to me. So you also had served some time in Vietnam. So we hear about Vietnam, Fred, with like all of its complexities and controversy. And I'm curious to your initial reaction upon being first immersed into this kind of exotic and dangerous place. And what was your first introduction to this place? Was it here in the States, or was it just you being supplanted over there?
Well, of course, all of OCS and all of your training was geared towards training people or taking to war. When I graduated, I went to Fort Bliss, Texas, and I was in charge of the training basic trainees and training them on the rifle range and doing some stuff so that you were geared to go. But as far as Vietnam, there's nothing that can prepare you for it, because you jump in that plane for a 22-hour flight, and when that plane lands at Tan Son Nhut Airport in Saigon, and they open the door, you are blasted. You're overloaded with this massive heat, thick air. You're hardly breathing. And so your first experience is already kind of ominous,
Right.
Depending on what time of the year you got there, all of a sudden, oh my God. And then there's always artillery and war stuff going on, and you think you just arrived in a safe place. But you have to remember, I arrived within 2 weeks of Tet of 67. So everything was torn apart and everything was on high alert. And so all of a sudden you come, I think the process is very hard, because in 20 hours you went from McDonald's and apple pie, and you went over to all of a sudden Nook Mom and chopsticks and Beetlejuice and
Beetlejuice.
Lambrettas.
Beetlejuice?
Yeah. Beetlejuice is when you ever see the Vietnamese ladies that have red teeth. Yes,
I've seen that.
Because it's a Beetlejuice is what they call it. Then it turns all their mouths red, and they all chew it. It's kind of like a relaxant, but there's nobody there that's not older that doesn't have totally red mouths from Beetlejuice.
Wow. Okay. You learn something new every day.
So that,
Wow.
And there's your culture. And girls in now dyes, and of course the VC were black pajamas, and lo and behold, everybody wore black pajamas. So, who's the enemy, who's not, especially at Tet. And so it's quite an experience.
And did they not train you at all or prepare you when you were in America?